I'm going to go a little bit into my reluctant entrance into journalism because I think it's relevant in this conversation in the sense that I grew up an avid reader, probably my number one hobby, and a creative writer all through high school and writing mostly poetry, and that was my main interest. And I was aware of journalism as a thing. I've read newspapers growing up, watched the news with my parents when I probably shouldn't have been. I think that led to a lot of my anxiety in life, watching the news at 6, 7, and 8 years old nonstop. But I was always interested in consuming journalism, but I never was interested in it as pursuing journalism, because I was under the impression that it was sort of the antithesis of creative writing, which was what I was into. And I thought that you had to write in a certain template, in a certain style, and if you didn't, then you were bad at it. And why would I want to do that? It's the opposite of creativity. I went to CPCC in 2000, I think it was 7 or 8, and took a journalism class as an elective just by chance. I had an instructor there who really pushed me and said, you're really good at this, so why don't you think about actually doing it? And that was around the time that I started to actually read and study people like Hunter S. Thompson and other journalists who showed me that, oh, wow, you do have your own voice in journalism, and you can push the boundaries, and you can be creative. I wouldn't say that sort of creative style is what I peddle in now. I'm definitely a more fact-based journalist, and he's known for his exaggeration, but reading his work is what sort of inspired me to realize, oh, this is something I could do and be creative with and build my own voice. And so that's what I started pursuing from there, and took that to UNC Charlotte, took that interest. And when I applied to transfer to UNC Charlotte, there was not a journalism degree. There was there was communications degrees, or there was English degrees, but there wasn't a specific journalism degree. So I went with English, and I think that really did make a big difference in my career trajectory. I'll sort of just go chronologically and talk about where, what I do now when I get there, but I think it's relevant to sort of go chronologically and talk about how that sort of inspired my career trajectory, because there were 2 classes in particular that came to mind when I got this invite, or 2 teachers rather. And one of them is here in attendance. I see Laura Vetter, who did, I was in at least 2 classes. I think it was 2 classes with her that were English lit classes, and they were just they changed the way that I read, in the sense that, I've grown up reading at all time, always reading, avid reader, but sitting in her class and having her sort of moderate these discussions where we would just sort of have a free discussion of the content that we were reading. It really changed the way that I read, not only fiction, but nonfiction. We were covering fiction in this class, but I think the most relevant thing to me here is that as I grew in my career to become from a freelance reporter to a staff writer to an editor, and now an owner/editor, it's become super important to me to read things with nuance, to read things with critical thinking, and to understand that it's about more than, say, what I thought of journalism as a kid. It's about more than just the who, what, where, when, why, but it's about how you present that, and reading it with nuance and presenting it with nuance so that people can read it with nuance. And I think that those discussions in Dr. Vetter's class really sort of shaped my thinking around that. Not to mention the more obvious thing, which is that I don't know how familiar anyone is with my paper, Queen City Nerd, but we are an alt weekly, which means we also cover arts and culture, which means we cover hip hop music. We cover literal fiction authors. I've done a few interviews with folks like Wiley Cash or Meredith Ritchie, who have recently released books. And both of those times, I was able to, in the interview, bring in themes and symbolism that I caught, where both of them were like, oh, wow, those are things that I didn't even think about. And those sort of things, first of all, make me super proud as a lifelong reader to be able to pick up on those things and give them back to them for them to think about. But it comes from those classes, from those English classes at UNC Charlotte. And then on a more basis in terms of editing, which when I got into the field, I never really wanted to be an editor. There is a people think of it as this is the trajectory where you become a reporter and your goal is to become an editor, but I just wanted to be a reporter for my whole career and just boost up to national. I actually wanted to be a war reporter when I first got into journalism, and still sort of learning through my work at Creative Loafing, which is the alt weekly that I worked at before founding Queen City Nerve, sort of learning that there are stories on a local level that need to be told that aren't being told, and that's what I wanted to pursue, to the very big relief of my mother, who knew that I wanted to be a war reporter. And then I decided I wanted to stay here and tell local stories. But I'm getting sort of off the track. I never had sort of wanted to be a editor, but as it sort of became, I don't want to say calling, as it sort of became my career path, there are aspects of, obviously, English classes that I took that really played a role into that. And one of the biggest examples I can think of is Robin Rothberg, who is an English professor there at UNC Charlotte as well. I took at least one class with her, I think maybe two with her as well, but she would do a thing called Grammar Spy, which was a year-long thing in which students would have to bring in publications that are public, obviously, things like the Niner Times, where I worked at, Creative Loafings, which were around at the time, any magazine, literally any magazine or newspaper you can pick up, and try to sort of call out grammar mistakes that they found, typos, whatever, anything that we were learning in the class. And I sort of took that as a challenge whenever someone brought up a Niner Times issue, because I was on the editorial staff there. And I still remember to this day, 10 out of the 12 presentations that used Niner Times were shot down by Robin as not legit mistakes. And I took that as a win. I don't remember what the two were. I don't remember it that well, but I remember 10 out of 12 and me thinking that was a pretty good percentage. We only got called on 2 typos in Niner Times during my class. But what that experience really shared with me is how important it is to pay attention to those little things that you might think are just a little typo that no one's going to notice. Because there's one thing I know in this social media world, is that as soon as you make a typo, there's nothing someone loves more than to pitch it back in your face and to do it on social media so that other people can see them, because it makes them feel good about themselves. And as you can tell, it bothers me a little bit that you can't just send me a personal email, but people will do it publicly. So it really teaches you. And Robin Rothberg was a great teacher in terms of letting you know that, and knowing that your work is public and it's going to be picked apart by every person who reads it, and nobody loves anything more than to correct you on it. So that was just one of those things that stayed with me through my time coming up as an editor. I started out of college as a freelance reporter for Creative Loafing, which was the alt weekly, for 30 years here until they shut it down in 2018. I covered the DNC for them straight out of graduating in 2012. And that was sort of my onboard. Well, no, I mean, I was an intern there in 2008, so that I'd already had the connections there. But then I became a staff writer at Matthews Mint Hill Weekly, Union County Weekly, and South Charlotte Weekly, a sort of conglomerate down there, and worked my way up to managing editor of the Union County Weekly. And that taught me a lot about both editing as well as sort of just the importance of small town municipal government. And it's really great sort of career work to be going and covering these small meetings in Weddington and Marvin and Indian Trail and Waxhaw. There's a different council meeting every night, and sort of really get your feet wet doing that. And then at one point in around 2015, I got a call from my old editor at Creative Loafing saying she was leaving and I was the only person that she would endorse to take her spot. So I became the news editor at Creative Loafing, and that's sort of what I've always wanted to do. I have a big passion for both local news and this alt weekly sort of format that we work under, which is to serve as a platform for the community. It's a community newspaper. I don't always work with seasoned journalists. I pride myself on working with people who didn't take any journalism class. And that's when knowing all the ins and outs and the nuance that I learned while getting my English degree really comes into play, because I've become more of a teacher than an editor, really, and really working things out with them. And we also, as an alt weekly, have a chance to go with more creative writing formats. We don't necessarily do fiction, although that's an issue that I would like to do one of these days. But in nonfiction writing, sort of doing that creatively and working with writers to sort of find out different ways to tell narratives. And my English degree plays a major role in that. And then, so in 2018, sort of without warning, the owner publisher of Creative Loafing shut us down. Just came into the office one day right after we had sent a paper to print on Halloween Day in 2018 and said, "You guys are going. We're switching gears here." He basically sold the paper to his son and turned it into a website that is now like a weird health and wellness thing. Sort of, I don't know what it is, to be honest, but it's neither here nor there. What me and my business partner Justin, who was a sales rep at Creative Loafing at the time, did was we were actually reached out to by some investors who said this leaves a hole that's going to have to be filled. This leaves a vacuum in Charlotte for alt weekly journalism. We can't just have this fastest growing city in the Southeast not have alt weekly journalism. We think you two are the two right guys to do it, and we'd be willing to back you. And we said yeah. And then just within like a week of having our paper shut down, we announced publicly we are going to bring a newspaper back, independently owned by guys who live here, not the guy in Greensboro who owned Creative Loafing, owned by people who care about the community. It's going to continue to be a community-based paper. And we announced that within like a week. And we said, we're going to do this December 6th, which was City of Charlotte's 250th birthday. And then about a week later, we were like, holy shit, what did we just tell people we're going to do? Because it was a huge endeavor, so much more work than I could have ever expected. But we got it out, and we got that issue out, and we've been going strong now for almost 3.5 years. So, you know, that's just sort of my career trajectory. I don't have a point as far as the English degree goes, but I can just say that throughout points in that trajectory, there have been many milestones and many parts where those classes, whether they be Vedder's classes or Rothberg's classes, or I mean, Liz and I, even before this started, we're talking about Rebecca Roeder's linguistics class, like where I remember her literally showing clips from The Wire as ways to teach us certain things about linguistics, and I was like, oh my God, I'm in heaven right now that I'm using The Wire to get my college degree. These are all things that still stick with me 10 years later after graduating. I hate saying that. I can't believe it's been 10 years, but always stick with me. Certain aspects of every one of those classes that always come into play, because studying fiction and studying creative writing and studying the English lit in general definitely has a huge relation to then working in the nonfiction world. And it may seem obvious to some, or it may seem like two different sides of the spectrum, but I will say that I can definitely attest to the fact that one holds the hand of the other in a major way when I'm doing it professionally. That's really all I've got.